Hello and welcome to the PR in Lockdown podcast, your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world. Produced by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA. I'm Rob Double, and in this episode, I'm talking to Laura Sutherland from Aura PR, a PR and communications consultancy. A fellow podcaster as well, and Laura, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, no problem at all. Thanks for having me.
I've hyped you up quite a lot now, saying that you're a fellow podcaster. Everyone's like, oh, this is going to be a good one then. This is going to be a good episode. So, no, thanks so much for coming on. And what is, for me at least, because I'm down south in London, a swelteringly hot day. I think the hottest day of the year. I don't know what it's like for you up there.
Well, yesterday it was raining, but today we have sunny skies, which is great, but I'm not quite sure it's going to be as hot as down in London.
Yeah, I literally feel like I might melt. For those watching this podcast on YouTube, I might be melting during this, so forgive me for that. But Laura, let's talk about what's happened over the last few months for you and Aura PR. So lockdown, was significant, has caused significant amount of disruption for so many people. First, if you just give us an overview of what Aura PR, brilliant. Aura PR. I knew I was going to do that as well. I knew that's going to happen. It's in my head. Just give us an overview of what Aura PR is about and what it does, and then just give an overview of what the last few months have been like.
Sure. So I'm a sole consultant, so I work by myself. I have worked from home for about 2 years now as well. Which has meant that obviously there hasn't been too much of a disruption because I am fully set up in my bespoke office. And so I'm a chartered PR consultant, and I have come away from working and delivering a lot of the tactical side of my work, primarily because clients came to me for strategy, problem solving, leadership, and sometimes actually industry colleagues came to me for advice on how to approach sensitive subjects that they weren't necessarily comfortable in their own businesses and organisations. So I would give advice to them on how they could approach essentially what they were facing and how they could deal with that. So I have, I suppose in the last few years, come away from delivering and being more of a consultant. And I would say that I really enjoy and I really like working with data. So one of the first things I do when I work with clients is I go and pull all their data, as much data as I can from any resources that they have. So whether it's Google Analytics or if it's email marketing or if it's from their CRM or whatever, it means I can then analyze that and then draw insight from it. And then that helps inform the strategy that I develop ultimately for them.
I just wanted to pick up on what you said right at the start, that you're a sole consultant. And I think that's going to be really interesting to hear about your experience of the last few months, particularly that really intensive lockdown period, the fact that you were doing it solo. Really, what was it like being just you in the room, having to manage, what was going on?
I think being a consultant, sometimes you can feel a bit lonely anyway. And particularly in lockdown, when you're faced with a situation where I lost work immediately, I lost quite significant work that not only impacted the sort of lockdown period of a few months, it impacted the rest of my year because one of the clients that I work with, I've worked with them for over 8 years, in fact, probably 9 or 10 years now. That client has a big event in the summer and they have a big event in the winter, but the winter event can't go ahead unless the summer event can go ahead. And because that couldn't go ahead, it all basically just disappeared. So I was faced with having some really great consumer work, some really good project and corporate work, to then basically having one retained client. So it's a bit of a hard thing to take when you're used to just being busy all the time, and when you're actively, I'm just generally a busy person. That's how I work best, keeping busy. As long as I've got deadlines to work to, I can work right up to them. I can deliver some really great work. But for me, I'm not too much of a worrier. So I always say where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. So I figured, well, if I'm facing this and I feel like this, then other people must be as well, particularly as everyone was in lockdown. It wasn't like that team was going into lockdown over there. Everyone was at home. So I set up a thing called PRs Unite in the first week. It was just a hashtag. And I said, hey, does anyone want to hang out online and chat about how we're feeling and what we're doing? So I ran that for about 12 weeks, every single week. And every week between sort of 12 and, like 50 people were turning up, talking about what they were experiencing, what they were doing, how they were feeling, how they were coping with things, sharing resources. I had like a format that I started in the first week, and that was sharing all the links to resources about mental health, how we can work, people's blogs. I blogged all the time, so I was constantly sharing what I was doing and how I was thinking. And that really, really helped. And people were saying, it's great because I look forward to this every week now. And I think that was kind of important for me to. I always like to help people. That's one of my things, and other practitioners. And by doing that, it meant that I could help other people, but I could have that connection myself.
Yeah. I mean, when you sort of got the news that, so many of your clients were dropping off and you realised the impact this was going to have on the business, in those immediate few days, what did you do to overcome the kind of the shock of it, I suppose, but also then try and find the way through? What was your coping mechanism?
Well, obviously, from a business perspective, finance is one of the first things you start to think about. How am I going to cope with this? How am I going to cope, and how long is it going to last? Most people have, a sort of a level of comfort in that their business has savings to an extent, and you can operate for 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 6 months without the same income levels. For a sole practitioner, it's slightly different because you're not necessarily building up that much money sitting there because, you're obviously thinking about tax and the most efficient way to make money at the same time as to save money and invest money in other things. So for me, it was just reviewing cash flow, and it was having a look at what I could. So one of the first things, which actually came out of PR Fest and was really useful, was money saving, I suppose, tips on looking at all your subscriptions. Like, realistically, what are you using? How much does that cost you every month? If you think about how much money we spend on tools for our jobs, how much money do we spend on that, and how much are we realistically, can we pause things? Can we take payment breaks? Do we cancel things? And then you start to really figure out financially, where are you? And that's really important because the number one thing that most people will be worried about is finance.
Did you find when you looked at your subscriptions, when you looked at your finance, were you actually surprised at the amount you thought, actually I can save a fair bit here? Was there a lot to be cut back on?
There was stuff to consider in addition to what I could cut back on. Like, if I was to stop that just now, would I get that same rate? Because I've signed up for a lot of tools in their first weeks or months and had very keen rates as a result. So if I was to cancel that and then come back on, say 3 or 6 months later, then what would the impact be? Am I actually going to be paying way over the odds? Probably was the likelihood. So actually I carried on with some of them, even though I didn't need them there and then. And it just made financial sense to do that in the long run. But yeah, the amount of money that, that PR practitioners have to spend, or consultancies or agencies or even teams, on all the different tools. And something we're talking about right now in the industry is the lack of integration of these tools. And actually there needs to be some sort of end-to-end solution for it. But that's a different story for another day.
Did it, the fact, as what you said, the challenges of being a sole consultant, sole practitioner, particularly around finances and the buffer you have, did it at any point, or has it changed your plans or your trajectory in terms of what you want to do? And, has it changed your plans and ideas about being a sole practitioner, for example?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. There have been a number of times when, things haven't gone right in the business. And I'm like, why am I here doing this by myself and putting so much pressure on myself? I'm going to jack it in and go and get a job in an agency or, be head of comms somewhere or something. But actually, the majority of what I really love about what I do is the fact that I can make my own decisions, and I can make my own decisions at the drop of a hat. I am a very ideas driven practitioner and business owner, and I suppose my entrepreneurial thinking allows me to sort of daydream and come up with ideas and opportunities. So I'm always rethinking my business. I'm always realigning what I'm doing, my services, how I operate to suit my clients and what they need. And that's an ongoing thing for me. But what lockdown has enabled me to do, is because I had more time, is to really review and take time and not worry about time, because time, was there sitting waiting. I took time to look at my business and to look at where there were opportunities, and most importantly, where my passions lie. And one of the things through lockdown, through PR Fest, was, and I don't think this is any news to anybody in the industry, but PR Fest was essentially called out for having an all-white panel on its programme. And that was a challenge at the time, because I had completely overhauled PR Fest for this year as a face-to-face event. And as a result of lockdown, I then made the decision to make the event online. So I then had to completely overhaul the event again to put it online. And at no point so I had originally approached someone who runs a BME organisation to speak at the event, and they had declined to come on and to speak at it. So, but the thing I didn't think of was, oh, right, well, I now need to go away and find somebody else instead. And that is completely my mistake. And that is very evident now that is part of the problem with the thinking in public relations. We're not actively thinking about how we can balance, how we can equal, and how we can give opportunities. So all this sort of realization came about around the event. And it kind of made me think, well, it's not just me that this problem lies with. It's an industry-wide. In fact, it's societal. But as an industry, and because PR Fest helps the industry progress and modernise, I thought, well, how can we use this as an opportunity to get all these amazing senior practitioners together to really think about this and to come up with solutions? So that's when the Driven framework was put into practice and launched at the event. It is a free tool for the industry. It's a tool that basically will help leaders review, think, and commit to action. And that is the thing. That is the thing that comes out of PR Fest time and time again, is action. Because our industry is so great at talking about stuff, it's so great at navel gazing, but action is definitely one of the things that needs to come out of that.
We're just going to go on a very quick break now, but coming up, we're going to chat to Laura about this transition out of lockdown into this new reality that we have for the PR and comms industry, and as well looking at what the future lies for the industry as a whole as the impact of the lockdown. Don't go anywhere. Let's just have a chat about this post-lockdown period. You are a sole consultant. You've said that there's been a significant impact to your business, and the clients, particularly on the event side, you losing business as a result of that. If you look at the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe up to the end of this year, what's your priorities? What are you really focused on doing?
So a quick rewind to during lockdown, I spent a lot of my time actually thinking about post-lockdown, so that I could basically come up with a plan to, I suppose, help businesses and organizations come out of lockdown and be ready not just to start operating again, but actually take advantage of the situation. And I called it rethink, re-engage, and reignite. And I worked on that. I did a webinar, delivered it, and people like law firms, accountants, like people came and attended it and took stuff away from it, which was great. And then it wasn't all doom and gloom, because about 3 weeks ago I won a new client. And that new client wanted to help me relaunch them out of lockdown when they were starting to operate again. And it was revisiting my rethink, re-engage, and reignite plan and work through that essentially with them. So the preparation had already been done. It was just a case of working and developing their own strategy for them. And so actually the time I'd spent doing that in lockdown had actually paid off already.
And when you were doing it at the time, was it hard to keep motivated on doing it? Because I assume at the time, very few people were actually focused on any kind of new business. They were just focusing on what they were going to do in terms of their organization. So when you were developing these products and you were developing what you were going to do next, was it hard to get any kind of engagement and get any motivation as a result to really push it forwards in the hope that somewhere down the line there'd be some results?
No. I'm a strange kettle of fish, but I suppose I thrive under these types of conditions. I use them to really, take myself out of the situation and start, as I said before, like dreaming of what could be possible and thinking, I suppose my biggest challenge was when I launched the first round of the sort of relaunching plans was at the end of April, and that was far too soon for other people. People were still reviewing their current situation. One of my challenges in general is that I think so far ahead and I plan, and other people don't think like me, so I have to take two steps back and wait for them to catch up before I can then go in and do what I need to do. So no, I don't find it. I didn't find it a sort of an experience where I couldn't be motivated. I was highly motivated to, what did I have to lose at the end of the day? I'd already lost, say, 75% of the business for that year. The only way was up as far as I was concerned.
And you talk about 75% of the business, being lost during lockdown. What's the picture now for you? What's the next few months looking like? Is the business starting to return back to previous levels, or any indication back to recovering that 75%?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one or two of the clients, I won't see them again probably till next year. And that's just, as I say, sort of impact of what's happened and how that will affect their annual performance. In terms of business in general, there are pitches out there at the moment. I don't tend to pitch, so I'm not involved in them, but I know of them. There are a lot of people asking for referrals and recommendations for work, but I would say that it's mostly for shorter term work. People are thinking in potentially like 3-month slots at the moment, maybe as far as 6 months, but not really. So, for example, like the new client I'm working with, I came up with the overarching strategy, which is a 2-phased approach. But the tactical side of things is only a 6-week lead time. And that just means that we can be very flexible in our approach and what we're doing.
That's really interesting that you've noticed that there's an increase in demand for shorter term work when the bit of the business that is coming through. I think that's quite an interest. I haven't heard that before, and so that's interesting that that's something you're noticing. Is there any particular type of services as well that you're noticing people are really interested in at the moment?
Well, funny you should ask that. Part of what I like to do is just always ask clients and ask people what kind of situation they're in and what they need essentially. One of the things that came up, which I was a wee bit surprised about, was website refreshes and email marketing refresh. So I think that's about looking at people's approaches to it and understanding now that let's say lockdown for me was a great thing because it forced people to go online. It forced people to look at tools and digital that they were dragging their heels about before. And I think that's a really good thing. But now they're in a situation where they probably realize that, websites aren't as easy to use, aren't as good for customer experience as they should be. Their emails are maybe going out and being informative, but they're not getting click-throughs, they're not driving leads and sales. And so people are reviewing these types of things because they know they can do better. But it's only really because of lockdown they've probably started to notice these things.
What do you think the fact of what you're getting through, which is that more shorter term work at the moment, has that changed the way that you're approaching things or your priorities for the coming 6-7 months?
As a consultant, it's difficult because maybe 10 years ago, I was very much retained by all my clients, some really big retainers and some small retainers. Over the last maybe 5 years or so, things have maybe moved to how I package my services so that I'm not charging a retainer fee the same every month for 12 months, for example. I'll try and sort of split things up into understandable chunks of money and what will be returned for the investment. And that seems to work much better than telling clients, "Oh, here, here's a $5,000 retainer every month," and they're like, "Oh, what does that mean?" So if I can break it down into, well, the audit and the strategy is going to cost this, and then this element and this element is going to cost this, then actually people are much more understanding as to what they're paying for. And I think one of the challenges that we have in our industry is that we're always talking about, well, how can we demonstrate value? How can we get businesses to understand the value we present to them? And unless we're properly, A, talking in their language, and B, properly measuring and evaluating the strategy and the activity, then we're not going to be able to demonstrate that value. And that value really has to add to the bottom line.
Yeah. Throughout the whole of lockdown, through PR Fest and your Driven Manifesto and the PRs Unite as well, you've been quite on the pulse of having conversations about the changes that are happening and the way people are, PR professionals are reacting and the industry is reacting as a whole. Is there anything that from everything you've been doing over the last few months, you see some clear themes and trends into how the industry is changing?
Well, I think one of your guests before, Nikki and George, I mean, they kind of hit the nail on the head from a virtual perspective. A lot of agencies are now talking about virtual working. There will be new agencies that come out and they will be virtually working. I think from my own point of view, I'm hoping now that the barrier to me living in Glasgow and potentially work happening in London or in Europe or in the US won't be a barrier any longer, because people now understand that actually I can do what I do from here as well as I could do if I was sitting in somebody's office. So I think there's going to be a change in that. I think people have referred to it as a hybrid way of working. And I think that's important as well, because not just as an industry, but as businesses and organizations, we don't know if there's going to be a second wave or when that might be. We don't know when we're next going to get told regionally we're going to go into a lockdown because of pandemic numbers. So we have to think about that. And as time goes on and as life evolves, who knows what else is going to happen like this in the future as well. We need to think about business resilience, and that's really, really important. I think more people are starting to understand that now.
I was going to ask, does this clear industry move, and to be honest, everyone move, all industries move towards a virtual workplace or virtual working environments. Does that sit well with you? Does that work for you? But you've almost answered that question, that actually you see clear opportunities in there, and perhaps actually clearer opportunities for sole practitioners and smaller agencies to start competing in business which is not geographically near them, that doesn't require big resources in that certain space and can be done virtually.
Yeah. And also I think from as I said before, I have the added flexibility of being able to flex my prices. I can flex what I do. I can adapt at the drop of a hat because I can make my own decisions. I obviously have targets I want to be able to meet, but right now I think that people are just starting to think about business, building relationships again. And I think that, like the freelance world will probably be called upon more because they're seen as a short-term solution to problems. And freelancers can plug gaps where, rather than having to recruit somebody, therefore that company doesn't have to think about their national insurance and their PAYE contributions and their healthcare and their pensions. And so there will be advantages to taking freelancers, to working short term with consultants on projects. And yeah, I do see clear opportunities in that. I think that we need to talk about it more, though, for people to understand what those opportunities are. So I'm grateful for this opportunity just now.
And I think what was interesting when you talked about, your driven manifesto and the need for action, and that comes across a lot in PR Fest as well. Do you think with what's happened, in addition to actually the coronavirus pandemic, the other stuff in lockdown, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests around that, do you think that this is going to be a time for action as well? There is actually going to be some real change, substantial change that happens in the industry as well?
Yes, simple. There's momentum for a start. And I think it's really important we keep that momentum going. If I could have turned things around quicker, then I probably would have. But given that I'm doing this all for free, I don't charge for it. I spent 2 months essentially working on this, pulling stuff together, and in collaboration with, PR Fest and other people. But on the wider scale of things, so like big global and European agencies that I've been speaking to, they're already in stages where they're developing their own manifesto, pledge, charter type things. And so that shows that there's more than just a talk about, we'll just stick something on the website. But what I think is really important, anyone can write a report, anyone can write a manifesto, anyone can go and stick it on their website, but you will be measured on your actions. And so accountability is huge. How will the industry, how will individuals, how will leaders be accountable for improving diversity, equality, and inclusion in our industry? And that's a subject that the PRC, the CIPR, Taylor Bennett Foundation discussed at the PR Fest panel event when the Driven Pledge was launched. And it comes back to ethics, it comes back to leadership, and it comes back to all the stuff as professionals, especially if you're signed up, to a membership organisation like the CIPR or the PRCA. It is so important that you not only have done your research and tried to understand the situation we're in, but you actually believe and that you actually commit to doing something going forward, to do better, to be better, and to help other people do and be better as well.
Laura, if people want to get in touch with you personally, but also as part of Aura PR, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, people know that I'm prolific on Twitter, so you can catch me at Laura from Aura. My website, aura-pr.com. But given that there's so many channels, so many blogs and things I'm involved with, I think I could be easy to find.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I survived. I haven't melted into my seat despite the weather. But it was lovely chatting to you. And I think it's really interesting hearing your insights. And thanks for listening to the PR in Lockdown podcast. Don't forget that this is an ongoing series. So if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to us on your preferred podcast library, or come and watch us on YouTube. Just search PR in Lockdown podcast and you'll see Laura and I's faces smiling back at you for this episode and the other episodes we have on the series. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guest this episode was Laura Sutherland from Aura PR. It is created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.